I was standing in front of my storage unit in the Cedar Hills community complex in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at a collection of items that definitely did not belong to me, when I realized that my HOA president had been using my private storage space as her personal garage for God knows how long. My name is Leonard Sullivan, and I had been living in Cedar Hills for about 3 years. The community was one of those cookie-cutter developments that popped up all over Phoenix in the early 2000s, complete with beige houses, mandatory landscaping requirements, and an HOA that seemed to exist solely to make residents miserable. Each homeowner was assigned a storage unit in a communal building, about a 10-minute walk from my house. I barely used mine. I had a few boxes of old college textbooks, some camping gear I kept meaning to use, and a couple of pieces of furniture I had not gotten around to selling. I only went to check on my storage unit that Tuesday morning in March because I was finally planning a camping trip with my buddy Marcus, and I needed to grab my tent and sleeping bag. The storage building was a long, beige structure that matched everything else in the neighborhood, divided into units about 10 by 15 feet each. I punched in my code at the main entrance and walked down the fluorescent-lit hallway to Unit 47. When I rolled up the door, my jaw dropped. The camping gear I had carefully organized along the left wall was gone. In its place sat a luxury golf cart, the kind that probably cost more than my car. Behind it was a stack of designer luggage, at least 8 pieces, all matching leather. There were boxes and boxes of what looked like expensive home decor, a rack of fur coats, several pieces of patio furniture that looked brand new, and even a freaking hot tub cover leaning against the back wall. My stuff had been pushed into a tiny corner, haphazardly piled on top of each other. I could see my camping gear crushed under a box labeled Brenda's China Set. Brenda. Of course it was Brenda. Brenda Morrison was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman who had appointed herself the neighborhood watchdog. She drove a white Mercedes SUV, always wore athleisure outfits despite never actually exercising, and had that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," from a mile away. Her blonde highlights were always fresh, her nails always manicured, and her attitude always condescending. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Lots of pictures. Every angle, every item, close-ups of the labels that said Brenda on them. I was methodical about it, making sure I had documentation of everything. Then I carefully made my way to the corner where my stuff had been shoved and inspected the damage. My tent bag had been torn, and several of my boxes were crushed. The furniture I had stored was scratched up from being moved carelessly. I felt my blood pressure rising. This was not just a minor inconvenience. This was theft of space I was paying for. The HOA fees in Cedar Hills were not cheap. $350 a month, and that included the cost of the storage unit. I was essentially paying for Brenda to store her expensive toys. I pulled out the HOA bylaws on my phone, something I had downloaded when I first moved in. According to Section 12.4, each homeowner was entitled to exclusive use of their assigned storage unit. Unauthorized use of another resident's storage space was considered a violation of the community rules and could result in fines and, in extreme cases, legal action. I took a deep breath and decided to handle this the right way. I would go through the proper channels first. I closed the storage unit and headed to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community pool. The office was open, and I found Brenda sitting behind the desk, typing away on her computer. She looked up when I walked in, and her expression immediately shifted to that fake smile she always wore. "Leonard, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What can I do for you today?" "We need to talk about my storage unit," I said, keeping my tone even. "Oh, is there a problem?" "Yeah, there is. I went to get some things this morning and I found your stuff taking up most of the space. My belongings were pushed into a corner and some of them are damaged." Brenda's smile did not waver. "I am not sure what you are talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the pictures. "This golf cart. It has your name on a tag attached to it, same with the luggage and the boxes." She glanced at the photo, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or surprise that she had been caught. But the smile returned quickly. "Oh, that. Yes, well, I noticed you were not using your storage unit very much, so I thought it would be fine to store a few things there temporarily. Just until I could make other arrangements." "Temporarily? How long have you been using my unit?" "A few months, maybe 6 or 7. "But really, Leonard, you barely use that space. I did not think you would mind." I stared at her, genuinely shocked by her audacity. "You did not think to ask me first. I am the HOA president. I have access to all the units for maintenance and inspection purposes." I saw an opportunity to utilize unused space. "That is not how this works, Brenda. According to the bylaws, each storage unit is for the exclusive use of the assigned homeowner. What you did is a violation." Her smile finally faded, replaced by a cold stare. "I would be careful about making accusations, Leonard. As the HOA president, I have a lot of responsibilities, and I do not appreciate being attacked by residents who do not understand how much work goes into maintaining this community. This is not about your responsibilities. This is about you using my property without permission." "Your property? That storage unit belongs to the HOA. You just have the right to use it. Which means you do not have the right to fill it with your personal belongings," I shot back. "I want your stuff out of my unit by the end of the week, and I want compensation for the damage to my belongings." Brenda stood up, her hands flat on the desk. "Or what? Or I will take this to the rest of the HOA board and, if necessary, pursue legal action." She laughed, actually laughed. "The board? Leonard, I have been the president of this HOA for 8 years. The other board members trust my judgment. If you think they are going to side with you over me, you are delusional. We will see about that." I turned and walked out before I said something I would regret. My hands were shaking with anger as I got into my car. I had tried to handle this reasonably, but Brenda clearly had no intention of cooperating. When I got home, I immediately started researching my options. The HOA board consisted of 5 members. Brenda as president, a vice president named Robert Chen, a treasurer named Patricia Gomez, and 2 general members, Michael Torres and Sandra Walsh. I found their contact information in the community directory and drafted an email explaining the situation. I attached the photos I had taken and cited the relevant section of the bylaws. I sent the email and waited. 2 days passed with no response. On the 3rd day, I received a reply from Robert Chen, the vice president. He asked if I could meet with him that Saturday morning at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. Saturday came, and I arrived at the coffee shop at 9 in the morning. Robert was already there, a man in his early 60s with graying hair and a kind face. He waved me over to a table in the corner. "Leonard, thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I have to admit, your email was quite a surprise." "I am guessing Brenda did not mention any of this to the board." He shook his head. "Not a word. I went to check your storage unit myself yesterday. I used the master key. Everything you described was there." "So you believe me?" "Of course. I have the photos and I saw it with my own eyes. What Brenda did is completely unacceptable. The problem is, Getting the rest of the board to take action is going to be tricky. Why? This is a clear violation, Robert sighed. Brenda has a lot of influence. She has been president for a long time and she has done some good things for the community. She can also be very, very vindictive when crossed. Patricia and Sandra are intimidated by her. Michael usually just goes along with whatever she wants because he does not want the drama. So what do? I am going to call an emergency board meeting. I will present your complaint formally, and we will vote on how to proceed. But I need you to be prepared for pushback. Brenda is not going to go down without a fight. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the HOA office. I was invited to attend and present my case. I spent the weekend preparing, printing out copies of the photos, highlighting the relevant sections of the bylaws, and even consulting with a real estate attorney friend of mine about my legal standing. Tuesday evening arrived, and I walked into the HOA office feeling nervous but determined. The 5 board members were seated around a conference table. Brenda sat at the head, looking calm and collected. Robert gave me an encouraging nod. The others, Patricia, Michael, and Sandra, looked uncomfortable. "Thank you all for coming," Robert began. "We are here to address a serious complaint filed by Leonard Sullivan regarding the unauthorized use of his storage unit by President Morrison." Brenda immediately cut in. "Before we start, I want to say that this is a huge overreaction. Leonard and I had a misunderstanding, which I am sure we can resolve amicably without wasting everyone's time." "It was not a misunderstanding," I said firmly. "You have been using my storage unit to store your personal belongings for at least 6 or 7 months without my knowledge or consent. My property was damaged in the process." I handed out the copies of the photos and the highlighted bylaws. The board members looked through them in silence. "This is quite concerning," Patricia said quietly. "I can explain," Brenda said, her tone measured. "Leonard is correct that I stored a few items in his unit. However, this was done in the interest of the community. We had some donated items for a charity auction that was supposed to happen last fall, and we needed temporary storage. Leonard's unit was largely unused, so I made an executive decision to utilize that space. Unfortunately, the auction was postponed, and I have not had a chance to move the items yet." It was such a blatant lie that I almost laughed. "Those are not charity items. I saw your name on multiple boxes and tags. That golf cart alone probably costs $15,000. "The golf cart was donated by a community member," Brenda countered smoothly. "As were the other items. Just because my name is on some labels does not mean they belong to me. I was organizing them." "This is absurd," I said. "If these are charity items, show me the documentation. Show me the list of donors, the receipts, anything." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I do not appreciate your tone, Leonard, and I do not have to justify my actions as HOA president to you." "Actually, you do," Robert said. "Leonard has every right to question this. And frankly, Brenda, I find your explanation hard to believe. I saw those items myself. They do not look like charity donations." Michael, the board member who usually stayed quiet, spoke up. "Maybe we should just have Brenda move the items and call it resolved. I mean, no real harm was done." "No real harm," I said, my voice rising. "My property was damaged. I have been paying for a storage unit I could not fully use for months, and Brenda violated the community bylaws. This is not something we can just brush under the rug." Sandra, a timid woman in her 50s, raised her hand slightly. "I think we need to take this seriously. If Brenda used Leonard's unit without permission, that sets a bad precedent. What is to stop any of us from doing the same thing?" "Exactly," Robert said. I move that we require President Morrison to immediately remove all unauthorized items from Leonard's storage unit and to compensate him for any damages. Additionally, I think we need to conduct an audit of how storage units are being used to ensure this has not happened elsewhere. I second that, Patricia said, surprising me. Brenda's face turned red. This is ridiculous. You are all turning on me over a simple misunderstanding. I have dedicated years to this community, and this is the thanks I get. We appreciate your service, Brenda, Robert said calmly. But that does not mean you are above the rules. All in favor of my motion. Robert, Patricia, and Sandra raised their hands. Michael hesitated, then slowly raised his as well. Motion passes, Robert said. Brenda, you have 1 week to remove your items from Leonard's unit and to provide him with a list of damages so we can discuss compensation. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are all making a huge mistake. Fine, I will remove my things. But do not come crying to me when this community falls apart because you decided to undermine my authority. She stormed out, leaving the rest of us in awkward silence. Well, Michael said, that went about as well as expected. I thank the board members for taking my complaint seriously and left feeling a small sense of victory. But I knew Brenda well enough to know this was far from over. The next day, I went back to my storage unit to check if Brenda had started removing her things. She had not. In fact, it looked like she had added more. There was now a stack of boxes labeled Christmas decorations and a rolled-up rug that definitely was not there before. I took more pictures and sent them to Robert. He called me within an hour. She is testing us, he said, sounding frustrated. She does not think we will actually hold her accountable. What can we do? Technically, the board can impose fines for bylaw violations. We could fine her for every day she does not comply, but that is going to create a lot of drama. I do not care about drama. I care about getting my storage unit back. Let me talk to the rest of the board. We will figure something out. Another week passed. Brenda did not remove a single item. Instead, she started a whisper campaign against me in the neighborhood. I started getting dirty looks from some of the residents. One neighbor, a woman named Karen Fletcher, actually confronted me while I was getting my mail. I heard you are trying to get Brenda kicked off the HOA board, she said accusingly. That is not what is happening. She used my storage unit without permission, and I asked her to stop. Brenda has been nothing but dedicated to this community. Maybe you should be more grateful. Grateful? For what? Having my property used without my consent, Karen huffed and walked away. It was clear Brenda had been spinning the story to make herself look like the victim. The board scheduled another meeting, this time without me. Robert called me afterward to update me. We voted to fine Brenda $500 for failing to comply with the order to remove her items. We also gave her a final deadline of this Friday. If she does not comply, we are authorizing you to have her items removed and placed in a public storage facility at her expense. And if she still refuses, then we start looking at removing her as president, but that is a whole other process. Friday came and went. Brenda did not remove a single item. I was done playing nice. I called a local moving company and explained the situation. They agreed to come out on Monday morning to remove everything from my storage unit and transport it to a storage facility. I also contacted a lawyer to make sure I was within my rights. Monday morning, I met the movers at the storage building. Robert came as well to serve as a witness. We opened my unit and started loading Brenda's belongings into the truck. It took 3 hours to move everything. The golf cart alone required special equipment. As we were finishing up, Brenda showed up. She pulled into the parking lot in her Mercedes, got out and marched over to us. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she screamed. Following the board's directive, I said calmly. You were given multiple chances to remove your items. You refused, so now they are being moved to a storage facility at your expense. You cannot do this. This is theft. No, Brenda, what you did was theft. This is me reclaiming my property. She turned to Robert. You are allowing this. You were given fair warning, Robert said. You chose not to comply. Brenda's face was purple with rage. I will sue you. I will sue all of you. Feel free, I said. I have documentation of everything. She stood there, shaking with anger as the movers loaded the last of her items onto the truck. Then she got back in her Mercedes and peeled out of the parking lot. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a notice in the mail from the HOA. It was a fine for $3,000 for unauthorized removal of community property. I called Robert immediately. Did you see this? I did. Brenda sent it to you without board approval. It is not legitimate. Ignore it. She is not going to stop, is she? No, I do not think she is. Robert was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Brenda launched an all-out war against me. She sent me multiple fines for made-up violations. My grass was supposedly too long, even though I had just mowed it. My house number was not visible enough from the street. My trash cans were left out past the allowed time, even though they were not. Every single fine was bogus, but dealing with them was exhausting. Then she started showing up at my house. The first time, she knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, claiming she needed to inspect my backyard for code violations. I refused to let her in. The second time, she came by while I was at work and left a note on my door threatening legal action if I did not pay the fines. I filed a formal harassment complaint with the board. They held another meeting and voted to issue Brenda a warning, but it did not stop her. One evening, I came home to find a boot on my car, not from the city, from the HOA. Apparently, Brenda had convinced a towing company that worked with the HOA to put a boot on my car for unpaid fines. I called the towing company and explained that the fines were not legitimate. They said they needed authorization from the HOA to remove the boot. I called Robert, who was horrified. He immediately contacted the towing company and got the boot removed, but the whole thing took 3 hours. That was when I decided enough was enough. I was not going to let Brenda bully me anymore. I did some digging into HOA law in Arizona. I learned that if an HOA president abuses their authority, homeowners have the right to petition for their removal. It required signatures from at least 20% of the community, which in Cedar Hills meant about 40 homeowners out of 200. I started by talking to my immediate neighbors. To my surprise, many of them had their own horror stories about Brenda. One couple had been fined repeatedly for having a non-approved mailbox, even though they had submitted the proper paperwork. Another neighbor had been threatened with legal action for painting their front door a shade of blue that Brenda deemed too bright. Word spread quickly, and more residents came forward. It turned out Brenda had been abusing her power for years, but no one had wanted to stand up to her. Now that someone was finally doing it, they were ready to help. Within a week, I had collected 60 signatures, well over the required amount. I submitted the petition to the board, and they scheduled a special meeting to vote on Brenda's removal. The meeting was packed. It seemed like half the neighborhood showed up. Brenda sat at the front, looking defiant. I presented the petition and gave a brief summary of why I was calling for her removal: abuse of power, harassment, unauthorized use of my storage unit, and issuing illegitimate fines. Several other residents stood up and shared their own experiences. The stories were damning. One man described how Brenda had tried to force him to remove a tree from his yard because she did not like how it looked, even though the tree was perfectly healthy and within code. A woman talked about how Brenda had threatened to put a lien on her house over a $50 fine for leaving her garage door open. By the end, it was clear that Brenda had lost any support she might have had. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president. Robert was appointed as interim president until a new election could be held. Brenda stood up, her face a mask of fury. "You have not heard the last of me," she said. Then she walked out. I thought that was the end of it. But 2 days later, I got a call from the storage facility where Brenda's items had been moved. "Mr. Sullivan, we have a problem," the manager said. "Miss Morrison has not paid for her storage unit, and according to our records, you are listed as the person who authorized the move. We need payment, or we will have to auction off the contents." "I am not paying for her storage," I said. "She is responsible for her own belongings. We understand, but if she does not pay within 30 days, we will proceed with the auction. We just wanted to give you a heads up since you were involved in the move." An idea started forming in my mind. Arizona law allows storage facilities to auction off the contents of unpaid units to recover costs. If Brenda refused to pay, her belongings would be sold. And since I had been the one to move the items, I would be notified of the auction. I called the storage facility back. "If it goes to auction, can anyone bid on the items?" "Yes, it is a public auction. Anyone can participate." "And the proceeds go to cover the storage fees." "Correct." "Any excess goes to the original owner, but if the auction does not cover the full amount owed, the owner is still responsible for the balance." "Perfect." I waited. 30 days passed and Brenda did not pay. The storage facility sent her multiple notices, all of which she ignored. Finally, they scheduled an auction for a Saturday morning in late May. I showed up early, along with about a dozen other bidders who had seen the auction listing online. The auctioneer opened the unit, and everyone got a chance to look at the contents. The golf cart, the designer luggage, the fur coats, all of it was there. The bidding started at $500 to cover the storage fees. I bid $600. Someone else bid $700. I went to $800. The other bidder dropped out. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 7 for $800, the auctioneer said. I could not believe it. I had just bought all of Brenda's belongings for $800. The golf cart alone was worth at least $15,000. I arranged to have everything moved to a different storage facility, one that Brenda did not know about. Then I listed the items for sale online. The golf cart sold within a week for $12,000. The luggage went for $2,000. The fur coats, the furniture, the home decor, all of it sold quickly. By the time I was done, I had made over $30,000. I kept $800 to cover what I had paid at the auction. Another $2,000 to cover the cost of moving and storing the items, and another $5,000 for the damaged camping gear, and the hassle Brenda had put me through. The remaining $22,000 I donated to a local charity that helped families in need. Word got around the neighborhood about what had happened. Some people thought it was hilarious. Others thought I had gone too far. I did not care. Brenda had stolen from me, harassed me, and abused her power. As far as I was concerned, justice had been served. But the story did not end there. About a month after the auction, I received a letter from a law firm representing Brenda. She was suing me for the value of her belongings, claiming that I had stolen them and sold them illegally. I immediately contacted my lawyer friend, a guy named Dave Mercer who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. He reviewed the letter and laughed. "She does not have a case," he said. "You followed the proper legal process. The storage facility auctioned off her belongings because she failed to pay. You purchased them at a legal auction. She has no grounds to sue you." So I just ignore this. No, we respond. I will draft a letter explaining why her lawsuit is frivolous and warning her that if she proceeds, we will countersue for harassment and legal fees. Dave sent the letter, and we waited. A week later, Brenda's lawyer sent a response, withdrawing the lawsuit. Apparently, once they reviewed the facts, they realized she had no case. I thought that would finally be the end of it. But Brenda was not done yet. One evening in mid-June, I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I heard a loud crash outside. I ran to the window and saw Brenda standing in my driveway, holding a baseball bat. My car window was shattered. I immediately called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. Brenda was still there, pacing back and forth in my driveway, muttering to herself. The officers approached her cautiously. "Madam, we need you to put down the bat. He stole from me," she said, her voice shaking. "He took everything I owned and sold it. He ruined my life. Madam, put down the bat and we can talk about this." Brenda dropped the bat and started crying. The officers handcuffed her and put her in the back of their patrol car. Then they came to talk to me. I explained the entire situation, from the storage unit to the auction to the lawsuit. I showed them all the documentation I had, the photos, the emails, the board meeting minutes, the auction receipt, everything. "This is clearly a civil matter that escalated," one of the officers said. "But what she did tonight is criminal. That is destruction of property and potentially trespassing. We are going to take her in." I gave a statement and agreed to press charges. The officers left with Brenda in custody. The next day, I found out that Brenda had been charged with criminal mischief and vandalism. She was released on bail, but the damage to her reputation was done. The remaining residents of Cedar Hills who had supported her quickly distanced themselves. The new HOA board, led by Robert, issued a statement condemning her actions and making it clear that she was no longer welcome at any community events or meetings. Brenda's court date was set for August. I was subpoenaed to testify, which I did. I brought all my documentation and walked the judge through everything that had happened. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that she had been under extreme emotional distress, but the judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Morrison, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this situation through proper channels," the judge said. "Instead, you chose to harass Mr. Sullivan and ultimately to destroy his property. That is unacceptable. I am finding you guilty of criminal mischief and vandalism. You are ordered to pay restitution for the damage to Mr. Sullivan's vehicle, which amounts to $1,200, plus court costs. You are also sentenced to 6 months of probation and 40 hours of community service." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm to stop her. As we were leaving the courtroom, Brenda turned to me. "I hope you are happy," she said bitterly. "You destroyed my life over a stupid storage unit." "I did not destroy your life, Brenda," I said calmly. "You did that yourself. All I did was stand up for my rights." She did not respond. She just turned and walked away. Over the next few months, things in Cedar Hills slowly returned to normal. Robert was officially elected as the new HOA president in September. He immediately implemented new policies to prevent abuses of power, including term limits for board members and a requirement that any fines or violations be approved by a majority of the board, not just the president. I got my storage unit back, and it stayed empty except for my camping gear and a few boxes. I finally went on that camping trip with Marcus in October. We drove up to Flagstaff and spent a weekend hiking and sitting around a campfire. It was exactly the break I needed. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she sold her house in Cedar Hills and moved to Scottsdale. I never saw her again. Looking back, the whole situation was absurd. It started with something so simple, a storage unit, and escalated into a full-blown war. But it taught me an important lesson about standing up for yourself, even when it is difficult, even when people try to intimidate you. I also learned that HOAs, while they can serve a purpose, can also become tools for petty tyrants if there are not proper checks and balances in place. Brenda had been able to abuse her power for years because no one had challenged her. It took one person standing up to her to bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. The new HOA board under Robert's leadership was a breath of fresh air. They focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. They organized neighborhood events, improved the common areas, and actually listened to residents' concerns. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. One evening in December, I was sitting on my porch when Robert walked by with his dog. He waved and came over to chat. "How is everything going?" he asked. "Good, really good, actually. I wanted to thank you, for what you did." Brenda needed to be stopped, but I do not think I would have had the courage to stand up to her the way you did. You stood up to her too. You supported me when the rest of the board was afraid. "We make a good team," he said with a smile. "Listen, we are having elections for the board again in February. Have you thought about running? We could use someone with your tenacity." I laughed. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I have had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, let me know." He waved goodbye and continued his walk. I sat there for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. It had been a wild ride, but I had come out the other side stronger and more confident. The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas with my family in Tucson and New Year's Eve with friends in Tempe. When I returned to Cedar Hills in January, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from Brenda. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was handwritten, and the handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. "Leonard, I am writing to apologize for everything that happened. I know I was wrong. I let my ego and my need for control get the better of me, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. I am in therapy now, working through my issues. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry. I also want to let you know that I have paid the restitution in full, and I completed my community service. I am trying to move on with my life and be a better person. I hope you can find it in your heart to move on too. Brenda." I read the letter twice, trying to gauge whether it was genuine or just another manipulation. In the end, I decided it did not matter. Whether Brenda was truly sorry or not, I had already moved on. The letter did not change anything. I folded it up and put it in a drawer, then went about my day. Life in Cedar Hills continued peacefully. The new HOA board was efficient and fair. Neighbors who had been at each other's throats under Brenda's regime started getting along again. The community felt like a community for the first time since I had moved in. In February, just as Robert had mentioned, there were elections for the HOA board. I did not run, but I did vote. The new board members were all reasonable people who genuinely cared about the neighborhood. It was a relief. One Saturday in March, almost exactly a year after I had first discovered Brenda's belongings in my storage unit, I was cleaning out my garage when I found an old box of photos from college. I sat down on the driveway and started flipping through them, laughing at the memories. My neighbor from across the street, a guy named Tom who I had become friends with during the whole Brenda ordeal, walked over with a beer in hand. "Taking a trip down memory lane?" he asked. "Something like that. Hard to believe it has been a year since all that craziness with Brenda." "Tell me about it. This neighborhood is so much better now. My wife and I were actually talking about how much we enjoy living here again. For a while, we were thinking about moving just to get away from the HOA drama. I am glad you stayed. Me too. He raised his beer. Here is to standing up to tyrants and taking back our community. I laughed and grabbed a soda from my cooler, clinking it against his beer. I will drink to that. As the sun set over Cedar Hills, casting a warm orange glow over the identical beige houses, I felt a sense of peace. The battle with Brenda had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also been worth it. I had learned to stand up for myself, to navigate bureaucracy, and to fight for what was right. And in the end, justice had been served. Not just for me, but for everyone in the community who had suffered under Brenda's reign. The storage unit, the auction, the court case, all of it had led to real change. I finished sorting through the photos and carried the box inside. As I closed my front door, I glanced back at the quiet street. Cedar Hills was not perfect, but it was home. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a place where I actually wanted to be. The story of Brenda Morrison and the storage unit became something of a legend in Cedar Hills. New residents would hear about it and ask me for details. I always kept it brief, not wanting to rehash the drama, but it was clear that the story had resonated with people. It was a reminder that even in a small community governed by a homeowners association, individuals have rights, and those rights are worth fighting for. In the years that followed, I stayed involved in the community, attending HOA meetings when important issues came up, volunteering for neighborhood events, and generally trying to be a good neighbor. I never ran for the board, though Robert continued to ask me every year. I preferred to stay on the sidelines, offering advice when needed but not taking on the responsibility of leadership. The storage unit remained mine, and I made sure to use it regularly, if only to prevent anyone from getting ideas about utilizing the space. My camping gear was always neatly organized, and I added a few new items over time: a kayak, a portable grill, some fishing equipment. I took more trips with Marcus and other friends, exploring Arizona's beautiful landscapes and enjoying the freedom that came with having my life back in order. Brenda never returned to Cedar Hills. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved on to a different neighborhood in Scottsdale, but I did not keep tabs on her. As far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed. The one lasting impact of the whole ordeal was the change it brought to the HOA itself. Under Robert's leadership, and later under the leadership of other fair-minded presidents, Cedar Hills became a model for how an HOA should operate. The focus shifted from petty enforcement to genuine community building. Rules were still in place, but they were applied fairly and with common sense. The storage building where the whole saga had begun was eventually renovated. The units were updated, and a new security system was installed to prevent unauthorized access. It was a small change, but it symbolized the larger transformation that had taken place. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize that the situation with Brenda was about more than just a storage unit. It was about power, accountability, and the importance of standing up to bullies, even when it is easier to just let things go. It was about refusing to be a victim and taking control of your own narrative. I also learned that documentation is everything. The photos, emails, and records I kept were crucial in proving my case and protecting myself from Brenda's retaliation. Without that evidence, the outcome could have been very different. But perhaps the most important lesson was about community. When I started collecting signatures for the petition to remove Brenda, I discovered that I was not alone. There were dozens of other residents who had been mistreated, who had felt powerless, who had been waiting for someone to take the first step. By standing up, I gave others the courage to do the same, and that, more than anything else, was what made the whole ordeal worth it. Today, Cedar Hills is a thriving community. The HOA functions as it should, maintaining property values and common areas without overstepping its bounds. Neighbors know each other and look out for one another. And I, Leonard Sullivan, can walk to my storage unit without worrying about what I might find inside. It is a simple thing, really, having access to a space that is rightfully yours. But after everything I went through, I never take it for granted. The story might sound crazy to outsiders. The idea that an HOA president would use someone's storage unit as her personal garage, and that it would escalate into lawsuits, auctions, and criminal charges. But anyone who has ever dealt with an overbearing HOA knows that truth is often stranger than fiction. In the end, Brenda Morrison was held accountable for her actions. She lost her position, her reputation, and her belongings. She was convicted of a crime and forced to pay restitution. And the community she had ruled with an iron fist moved on without her, better and stronger for having confronted the problem. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground, follow the rules, and let justice take its course. It is not always easy, and it is not always fast, but it is always worth it. And if I ever find myself in a similar situation again, I will know exactly what to do.